Hey everyone, happy Sunday. Welcome. Thank you everyone for joining me in this session. As always, I'm honored to be here with you in this time of sensitivity and continued uncertainty. And I look forward to sharing time with you here in our shared sacred space together today. So, the things we'll do today in our time together in sacred space is number one, in a few moments, we will set our sacred space and we then will have our talk about our overall topic for the session for the month. And the topic this month is recovering your personal power. Recovering your personal power. We'll have an exercise related to that, and then we'll close sacred space as usual. And let me just make sure the feed is okay. Okay, great. So in this session, before we actually set sacred space, there's just one quick housekeeping item or announcement I wanted to make, a bit of a save the date. So basically, after 2.5 years of pandemic now, we have finally set the date for our next in-person retreat, which is going to be a little bit outside Athens, Greece, this coming October 2 to 9. And the theme of our retreat this year will be living in the sacred. Living in the sacred. And the goal of this retreat, it will be a 7-day retreat. We haven't done a full week-long retreat ever yet. They've always been 3-day retreats. And the goal of this retreat, where for those of you who will be able to attend, if I have you for a full week, my goal is to really offer a kind of quick fire composite across all the topics I teach. So across healing, bliss, manifestation, even meditation, even maybe a little bit of spiritual stuff. And the point is to kind of rapid fire hit you with all these things over the course of a week. While we're in Greece, swimming, picking olives, picking lettuce, going to the hot spring lake nearby, going to the temple nearby, so that you can start to make connections between the different things I teach in order to, for all of us together, to start to weave it into an integrated, holistic way of life, which I've been referring to as living in the sacred. So, so let me just, I'm going to put up a link. And so basically, an email has already gone out to a few folks that are kind of on the advance notification list. They're signing up. We're going to give them a few more days to make their sort of choices, and then we'll email more people after that, and then it will, we'll probably wrap it up from there. But because you're here live on Live Sacred Space, if you would like to know about the retreat, shoot me an email. If you would like to consider joining the retreat, you can do that. I consider this your invitation. And what I'll do is I will put up in the chat. Oh, I should probably do this on Facebook too, just to be fair. A link to the retreat info page. And the second link here will have some photos of the place. And yeah, so I'm really quite excited about this retreat. I can't wait to see everyone. I can't wait to talk about this topic of integrating everything into a way of life and living in the sacred. It will be a very small group, obviously. There will be swimming in this hot spring sacred lake, in the ocean, dinners by the ocean, picking olives, picking lettuce, making dinner. And then there's also this ancient healing temple that is about, basically like just up the road from the villa where we'll be staying, where they actually did dream healing, 2,000 years ago, like 400 BC. We'll learn labyrinth making and building, and we'll be doing dream reading, all of it. So it will be very cool. If you can make it, that'll be really fun. And it's completely kind of butler level. It's all on the link. You just kind of get yourself to Athens International Airport. The drivers, the team will meet you there. They'll take you 45 minutes outside the city, and we'll be there together for a week. If you can't do the retreat over the summer, we're offering a sort of 3-month intensive online version of Living in the Sacred as well. That'll be in the same link. And the last thing is actually, I'm just going to put my email up as well for those of you who may not have easy access to it. You'll need that to, just follow up to get more information. You can't actually sign up from those links. They're only information pages. This will be a small one. We will sort of close it out pretty quickly. I think we will do more retreats probably in like the spring of next year. If you have, had good experiences with retreat venues anywhere in the world in the past, let me know about them. I'm always, on the lookout for retreat venues that are kind of energetically resonant with the kind of stuff we do. So anyway, that's the quick housekeeping item. I wanted to make sure everyone in LSS had the opportunity before the next email wave to make sure you know about the retreat, so you have the opportunity to learn about it and consider it. Okay, so with that point of housekeeping out of the way, we will now set our sacred space for the rest of the session. And obviously, it's important to tell you about these things before we actually set sacred space. Because as we know, once we're in sacred space, I'm not to pitch you or sell you anything, nor can anyone else. So in the process of setting our sacred space, I will start by saying what we would like to do. Our goal in setting sacred space, is to create a space together which is devoid of fear, threat, and control. Okay. In order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we define that. It could be a muse which comes and guides us. It could be our intuition, hairs on the back of our neck, right? Brilliant flashes of insights that come to us in the shower. A safe sanctuary space for us all to relax and surrender with no feeling of danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together, whether we do it online, in person, what have you. And in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do with every session, that we all follow the 4 principles of proceeding sacred space. Number 1, confidentiality, standard Vegas rules. What happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. Now that's the rule for when we meet in person, but we're here online. The stream is live and public. The replay will be live and public. So the way we handle confidentiality online is via anonymization. So if you would like to be anonymous, you don't have to be anonymous, but if you would like to be anonymous, you would come into the Crowdcast stream. You would go into edit your profile, change your profile username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, what have you, and then come back and continue chatting and answering questions, asking questions from there. That's number 1. Number 2 is the second principle is that as much as possible, we try our best to refrain from giving or creating any feeling of threat or controlling, not just in a hostile sense, but also in a well-meaning sense. So fixing, tough love, interventions, right? We don't do any of that, not because it's bad or wrong, but because that is of the provenance of control. Even something that's like well-meaning, well, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you, or this is for your own good, and I come in and try to control you and direct you in a certain way. That uses the levers and physics of fear, threat, and control. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. But here in sacred space, when we're trying to specifically create a space which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, so that we can get the things done that you can only get done in sacred space for the space of just an hour or two. We try our best to refrain from that to keep the space clean. So here we are holding space for each other to be however we are, right? To be afraid if we're afraid, to be anxious if we're anxious, to be happy and relaxed if we're happy and relaxed. And then also however we feel about how we feel. If I'm afraid and I'm like, yeah, it makes sense that I'm afraid. Or I'm happy, but I'm like, oh, I'm feeling very guilty that I'm happy and relaxed. Right? However you find yourself to be okay with that and to hold space for that in each other and also within our own inner selves. Right. So if you're like, oh, I'm really feeling down, I should really pick myself up. It's like, well, all of that, we are okay with that. And we hold space for that. The third principle is no commerce, right? So nothing may be sold. I can't sell you anything now that we're in sacred space. Gary can't sell you anything. Please refrain from pitching things to each other in the chat. We are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. We are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide. This covers also recommendations or suggestions, even if you have no sort of benefit from them, because it's the energy of the threat, the potential threat of like, if you would like to wake up in the morning, drink my coffee, right? That's well-meaning. I'm selling you something. I'm trying to sell you my coffee. But there is this element of threat where if you don't buy my coffee, right, you will lose out on the extra, energy for your morning. So even if it's a recommendation, we try our best to refrain from that. And the fourth and final principle is that there is no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything. You can stay, not stay. You can chat, not chat. You can tell your friends all about sacred space. You can tell no one about sacred space. And you don't have to even come to sacred space. There is no fear, threat, and control over like, you better come to this session with Artie. It'll be good for you. We don't do that, right? There's just no expectation of participation. You come and go as you please. You do as you please. Okay, so those are the four principles. And all of us together will tend to amplify the effect of those four principles. And so, so for our upcoming shared sacred space together, this is what I propose. And if you're not okay with that, that's totally okay. There's no fear, threat, or control for you to even join us in sacred space. But this is the threshold we are about to cross together. So if you are not okay with it, we just want to give you a moment. We'll pause to withdraw from the group if you feel so moved. And we'll catch up with you later in profane space. We'll still hang out, no worries at all. So we'll just pause for a moment and let everyone make their own sovereign selection on that. Okay. All right. And for those of us who are here still, we will now move forward together into our shared sacred space. And as we cross the threshold now into our shared sacred space, I would like to remind everyone, including myself, that we are now in a space where we will try our best to observe the four principles of sacred space: confidentiality / anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no tough love, no interventions, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. All right, welcome to our sacred space for this month. So our session topic for this month will be recovering your personal power. In this month's session, Gary found a tale from the Danish tradition that led us into this reflection on the nature of our interpersonal power, right? And how we tend to suppress our personal power. Why it is we do that, how we do that, right? And then how the process of trying to recover this power ends up transforming us. So we will read the story in the session. I'll invite Gary to come on screen and tell us about the story. And then we'll let the golden thread kind of lead us to wherever this leads us to in terms of the ultimate goal of recovering our personal power. So Gary, if you're there. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Artie. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear and see you. Great. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So yeah, it's a short story today,
Okay.
and it's another one of those stories that I've avoided picking for many sessions, even though it kept coming at me, and thinking this is too short and too cryptic to make any kind of sense. So yeah. So I love the story regardless, because it's just so rich with symbols. So that
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Would you tell us the story?
Yeah. So the story is called Master and Pupil, and like you said, it comes from the Danish tradition, and I found it in one of the Andrew Lang collections, fairy tale collections. So the story goes: there was once a man who had a son who was very clever at reading, and he took great delight in it. And, so he read quite a lot and he learned a lot. And then he went out into the world to find a job somewhere that hopefully uses his reading and his learned skills. And as he was walking between some mounds, he met a man. And this man asked him where he was going. And the boy said, well, I'm going to find a place for myself where I can be of some service. And the man then said, will you serve me? And the boy said, oh, yes, just as readily as anyone else. But the man then had a strange question. He said, but can you read? And the boy was quite proud, right? So he said, oh, as well as the priest. But here was the catch. The man said, oh, then I can't have you. Because I was just looking for a boy who couldn't read. And his only work would be to dust my old books. And saying that, the man went on his way, and the boy was just left there standing and looking after him. Well, that's a pity. I would have loved to get that place, because that's just the thing for me. I mean, imagine having books all around and spending all day just dusting those books. Wow. So he then made up his mind. I'm going to get this situation if I can. And he hid himself behind one of the mounds, turned his jacket inside out, and then he thought that meant that the man would not know him again so easily if he met him. And he ran along and met the man again at the end of the mounds. And the man stopped and asked, where are you going? And he did not notice that it was the same boy he had met before. And the boy said, I'm going about trying to find a job for myself. And the man asked, okay, will you serve me? And the boy said, oh yes, just as readily you as anyone else. And then there came the question, but can you read? And this time the boy said, no, I don't know a single letter. And that's it. He got the job. And all he had to do was dust his master's books. And as he did this, this is what he was planning for all along. He had plenty of time to read all these books as well. And he read away until at last he was just as wise as his master, who was actually a great wizard. And now that he had read all these books, he could perform all kinds of magic. And among other feats, he could change himself into the shape of any animal or any other thing that he wanted. So when he had learned all this, he didn't think it was worth his while to stay there any longer, and he ran away home to his parents. And soon after he went back, there was a market in the next village, and the boy told his mother that he learned now how to change himself into any animal or thing that he wanted. So he said, now I shall change myself into a horse, and father can take me to the market and sell me, and I'll come back home again all right. And his mother was frightened at the idea. But the boy said, you don't have to be alarmed. Everything will be okay. And he changed himself to a horse, and a very fine horse. And so his father got a high price for it at the market. But after the bargain was made and money was paid, and the buyer took him back home, the boy changed himself, to his own shape when no one was looking, and he went back home. And so the story, this really bizarre, astonishing story, spread all over the country. Everyone started talking about this fine horse that had been sold, disappeared, and everyone started wondering what this was about. And finally, the news came to the ears of the wizard. He said, aha, now this is that boy who fooled me and ran away. And I know that this is what he's doing. So I shall have him. And so the next time, the boy tried this again at the market, he changed himself to a horse, and he was taken there by his father. And the horse found, they found a buyer. And while they were negotiating, the boy's father and this new buyer, they were sitting and drinking together so they can talk the terms out. And the wizard came along, and he saw the horse, and he knew at once, okay, this is no ordinary house. This is this boy. And he offered the buyer far more than he paid for it. And so the new buyer, he sold the horse to the wizard. And the first thing that the wizard now did, now he had the horse, was to lead the horse away to a smith. His intention was to get a red-hot nail driven into the mouth, because once he did that, the boy would not be able to change his shape again. And now, the boy was wise. He saw the wizard, he knew what he was up to, right? And so he instantly changed himself. Before he could do this, he changed himself into a dove and flew into the air, right? And as soon as the wizard saw it, he changed himself into a hawk, and he flew up after it. And this is all happening really fast, right? And so the dove realized, now there's a hawk coming after me. So he turned into a gold ring and fell into a girl's lap, right? And so the hawk now, there's no point being a hawk. So he turned into a man, like a merchant, walked up to the girl, offered her a great sum of money if she could give him the gold ring she had. But the girl would not part with it, because seeing that this ring had fallen down to her lap from the sky, she thought it was sent from heaven. So she would not give it away. And the wizard kept on offering her more and more and more money. And now the ring, the boy, started to get nervous. And so he changed himself into a grain of barley and fell on the ground, hoping this man wouldn't be able to find him. But then the wizard was the wizard, right? So he knew what the trick was. He instantly then changed himself into a hen and began to search for the grain of barley. And then instantly, the grain now changed itself into a polecat and ripped the hen's head off with a single snap. And so the wizard was now dead, and the polecat changed back into human shape. And this young man now married the girl who got the ring. And from that time on, he never had to do magic again. So that's the story. Artie, would you like to come back up? Artie, you there? Ah, right.
Thank you for that. I always love listening to the story a second time when you tell it in live session. Okay, so I'll start with my usual question, which is where do you enter into this story?
So, like I said, it seems like this story, at least when I read it, the story really didn't make much sense at the beginning for me as to what is the point of the story, right? And we'll go into that, like the seeming pointlessness of the whole thing. But it felt like the entire premise of the story at the beginning was just built up to lead into this series of, the double transformations that were happening, the quick changes and the chase. It felt like the chase was like the main thing of the story. And so many of those symbols must mean something, right? It's so loaded with symbols that it. So that's what caught my attention at first. But when I kind of read deeper into the story, the one thing that really stood out for me was the point where the young man changes himself into a ring, into a gold ring, and falls into the lap of the girl. And then the girl refuses to part with the ring, no matter how much money is offered. And that's the girl he marries at the end, right? It reminded me of the session we did last month, where we read the Burmese story of the frog princess. And the reason I thought of that was the thing that really stood out for us in that story was, even though this was a frog and the prince had wanted to marry someone from the hair washing ceremony that he had, right? But because the bouquet of flowers fell on the frog, he said, all right, I'm going to go through with this. And so he marries the frog. And from there on, everything that the princess tells him, he follows through simply because it's his wife telling him to do it, right? And he doesn't question it, doesn't doubt her for a minute, and just does what she says. And that's what kind of leads him through the entire arc of the story. So it's this unquestioning faith that he had in the princess, the frog princess, was something that really stood out for us. And that's the feeling I got when I read this part. I mean, this girl doesn't know where the ring fell from, but she knew that if this was something that couldn't be exchanged, traded with money, she just wouldn't let it go, right? And that's the woman he marries at the end. So there was something to that really fascinated me, and I felt this very familiar feeling that we've come across this before.
Well, I mean, in this case, it's the masculine. It's the boy who loses faith in the feminine.
Yes.
Because he then jumps out. He's like, she's going to break. I need to get out of here.
Right.
Which I found very interesting as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think for me, I had a similar thing where I was like, I was just a blank after you read it. And the thing for me was, after the whole cycle of changes, right? It's horse nail, hawk dove, ring merchant, chicken barley, and then polecat in the end. And the polecat snapping the chicken's head off, right? The younger inner masculine, the emerging inner masculine, killing, i.e. transforming the older inner masculine, reminded me of a number of other stories. So the tiger's adopted son that we had done in like months and months ago.
Yeah.
And also, there's a Hindu tale called The King and the Corpse, which was popularized by Heinrich Zimmer, right, and Joseph Campbell, where there's a similar beheading of like the younger inner masculine of the older. And so it is this transformation of, so whenever a younger conquers the older, sort of in the sort of masculine side of things, it becomes this symbol of male initiation, right? Of transformation of the masculine from the old form into the new form, the old form trying to suppress it, and then the new form, they fight. And it's a question of, with every male initiation, there's always a question of, will the candidate actually make it? Because there is risk that they won't make it, right? So that was the lens which I ended up bringing to this. So before we started, let me give the usual sort of intro into how we read dreams, stories, myths, fairy tales. And the way we read these stories is we read them mythopoetically, which simply is a fancy word for saying that we treat the entire story world as a reflection of our inner world. In other words, we regard every major character and object in the story as a reflection of a different part of your own inner self. So in this case, the wizard is a symbol of a part of you. The young man is a symbol of a part of you. The horse, the chicken, the woman, the princess, the polecat are all different aspects of you. And then with that lens, we then press the play button. We let the video, the story narrative of the story unfold as you told it. And then we take a look at what changes from beginning to end. Who wins, who loses, who's better off, who's frustrated, and what, not lessons, but what physics do we deduce from, what principles do we deduce from watching the physics of the story? So if you look closely at the beginning of the story, the wizard, which is this literally wise, elder, authoritative, inner masculine figure, is hoarding knowledge, okay, in order to prevent transformation of the self. How do we know he's hoarding in order to prevent transformation? Because as we look at the entire arc of the story, when the knowledge gets out, the masculine gets transformed. The 2.0 young man, the 2.0 inner masculine, which is the young man, ends up taking the knowledge and then killing the old wizard, right? So in the end, and of course, there's only one inner masculine. So the wizard and the young man are two different aspects of the same inner masculine within you. Okay, so at the end, the young man has effected a transformation. And this is exactly what the wizard is trying to prevent. Hoarding the books, making sure no one reads it, because he already knows what will happen, more or less, if the knowledge gets out. Okay. Do you have any questions or anything to add here? Oh, we lost your sound. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, yeah.
So when you said this, it reminded me of another story that we did a few months ago, where this was about delight and bliss, and there is this. It came from a southern Indian tradition where this Brahmin finds this monster outside, and this monster was in his previous life a musician, and he failed to teach music to others, and he was punished in his next life. He had to become this monster who is constantly tortured by bad music all around him, right? So, and he has to endure that because he failed to teach music. And I'm reminded of that because it's such a common motif in Indian folktales and tradition and belief system, that not teaching or failing to teach what you know is like a sin.
Yeah.
If you know something, you should teach it, right? So that I was kind of, it's surprising to find that motif in like a Danish folktale, where it seems like the wizard was punished at the end because he was guilty of the sin where he refused to share what he knew.
Yeah, and By the way, if you have the links for these two stories, you can put them up in the chat so that everything's interlinked for later. But yeah, this makes me think. So when you read this story the first time, as you're reminding me now, this story triggered me a little bit because in classical Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism as well, there is a term called Pratyeka Buddha, which means Pratyeka, a Buddha who does not teach. Right? So a Buddha who's like attained enlightenment, obviously they're Buddha, but they do not teach. And this is, at least among the clergy, highly derogatory, right? So like Pratyeka Buddha, that's like, that guy's a Pratyeka Buddha. He made it, but he's not teaching. But I've always taken issue with this because I believe that the very act of not teaching, right, this sort of enlightenment spiritual stuff, is itself a teaching, right? Because there's actually nothing to teach. The thing, I mean, if we go back to like the session on the Tao Te Ching and the nature of reality, it is already everything and everywhere, and there is only one thing. And so to actually teach it is, I mean, there's all kinds of other derogatory things I could say in reply. It's like the old Zenist saying where it's like teaching you about this is like picking your pocket and then selling the thing I've picked out of your pocket back to you. Or an image I often use, it's like we're all playing Monopoly. And then I'm the brilliant sort of, oh so clever guy that stands up, pushes back from the table and said, fellas, all this money is fake. And, this isn't actually real estate. These aren't actually deeds that we're playing. And the hotels are just bits of plastic. They're not real, right? And it's like everybody already knows that, right? And if you stand up and make this like pronouncement on the nature of the universe, you're kind of just being a jerk. Everybody knows that. They're playing for a reason. They paid to play this game. They paid to like watch the scary movie. And to the extent that you pull people out of that, you're kind of just being a jerk. So when I started to teach meditation, right, I realized very quickly I have no interest in teaching that sort of more spiritual side of things. And then all of this like healing and bliss and manifestation related stuff came out of me over the course of basically a decade. And I end up teaching all of what I do teach, not because it's virtuous or because the world needs it, but because for me, it's fun, right? It's blissful. It's really fun doing fairy tales and talking about all this stuff. The spiritual stuff is no fun to me. Because especially in the modern world, the people who end up coming to you to seek just the spiritual, at least in my past experience, are typically very over-intellectualized, very disembodied, and they're kind of just looking for these peak experiences with, I'm picking on these things. There's nothing wrong with these things, but like Kundalini or like ayahuasca, or, they're looking for peak experiences driven by a kind of, I would go so far as to call it a lusty desire for the pleasure of these peak ego experiences. And when you scratch a little beneath the surface, what they're really looking for is the healing of wounds, which really has nothing to do with the spiritual. So I just do the healing. That ends up being the fun part. That's where people actually get excited and not just kind of, kind of pretentious. So the spiritual stuff in the West is just like no fun for me. It's not blissful for me.
Yeah.
It was more
really
questions,
powerful.
or should we get back to that? Yeah.
Yeah, it was very powerful for me when you first told me about the Pratyeka Buddha thing, because it's very hard to think that a spiritual quest can be. I mean, it's not always that way, but it can be a way of soothing your wounds, right? And it really hit me at one point. I was like, all of this that we do because we want to kind of seek answers to certain questions, or you just have inclination to spirituality. But again, there's a question there. What are we doing it for? And what is the real reason for doing this? Is it just curiosity and wonder and no good reason? Or is it just because there is a deep desire to find something that will really soothe this eternal kind of feeling of not good enough? And it's a really honest introspection point where you have to sit with that, and it's not a very comforting feeling, because that's when kind of grief and discomfort and everything swells up. And it happened to me, and I was very uncomfortable with what came up. But it's a powerful question.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to be careful, and I want to say that there's nothing wrong with doing spiritual stuff,
No.
even if afterward you realize you did it for soothing or for ego or for for profane reasons. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that. If you learn to meditate and you join an ashram and you meditate for like 8 hours a day for a couple of years, and then you realize, oh, I was just doing that as a kind of ego trip, I'm like, that's okay. It's like way better than an actual drug addiction or robbing banks. There are far worse ways you can be like soothing and stroking your ego. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's just life. I think the only difference is, I just, as a person, as someone who's choosing how he spends his time on the earth, I just have no interest in being involved with any of that. That's the only thing I'm saying. I'm not saying it's bad.
Right. Yeah. So like I said, the discomfort is not because of no, this is wrong. The discomfort is because when you ask that question, you've asked a healing question. So everything that really comes up is kind of immediately you've just opened the valve, and all of the wound stuff just comes out, which is is great, but at the same time not right.
I think after a while, all the spiritual people stop, coming for me.
Right.
Anyway, I think I'm sorry. Keep going. Did you have?
No, I mean, but it is interesting in this story that all of this, like you said, he's hoarding all this knowledge and kind of not wanting to teach. I think it made sense to me when you said it's because he already knew that there was going to be a transformation, that knowledge, when shared, will effect some kind of transformation. That made a lot of sense to me.
Right. I think so. Here's one way of looking at it. When you go on a journey and maybe you find the thing that seems like a dead end, or you're like, oh, I need to make a U-turn or whatever. Mm-hmm. That is a valid part of the transformation. When we talk about circumambulation and the labyrinth, right? Yeah. The one step forward, the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The 1 step back is not a failure. It's a part of the pattern. It needs to be fulfilled as well. Yeah. Right. So there's nothing wrong with pursuing something or being in this mode, right? When you first start to explore healing and bliss and spiritual things, you often go through this phase where it's like one shiny thing after another. It's like, oh, I'm going to try this. Now I'm going to try this. Now I'm going to try this. And after you've tasted the buffet, and this can often take, a year or a few years, you taste a bunch of things on the buffet. I think many people who are not just drunk on the peak experience thing will start to discern this golden thread of after you've tasted a lot of cuisines and cooking, for instance, you started to get a sense for what people mean by umami, right? Like this 5th flavor. You're like, oh, okay, this is how Korean cuisine brings it out. And this is how Italian cuisine brings it out, Northern and Southern Italian. But you start to sort of get a feel in your body for the underlying thing. And what from one shamey fear threat control lens is like, oh, you failed, you tried so hard, you were being driven by your ego, and you did kundalini and it was so dumb. is that exact same life experience is seen through a more sacred lens, devoid of fear, threat, and control. And you're like, yeah, and then I stumbled into this other thing, which actually was the thing that worked for me. And I know how to spot a scammer, snake oil salesman, charlatan like that now.
Yeah.
Right. And I use all of those skills every day. Right. So, there are lots of classical sayings that, there are no accidents, there are no mistakes. But that's the kind of feeling. So here in the story, right, when you look at the transformation the inner masculine goes through, the wizard seems like he wants to avoid that. He's like choosing only, employees that cannot read.
Yeah.
But then at this meta level, you realize the wizard is in on it too. Because the wizard and the young man are both aspects of the same inner masculine, right? So for example, ding, 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 the first neon sign is the wizard doesn't recognize the boy further on through the field of little mountains, just because the boy turns his jacket inside out. Right? This is a wizard, by the way, who has the storehouse of knowledge that it specifically gives him the power of shape-shifting. Ding, ding, ding. Yeah. And when the boy does the comical shape-shifting of turning his jacket inside out, the wizard can't spot that. Of course the wizard can spot it. Yeah. Right? And then he takes him on anyway because he's secretly in it. So we're like, oh, I was just a young, dumb, naive seeker and I followed after this. And it's like there's a wizard part of you that's in on it. Okay. And then changing himself, the wizard, into a hawk to catch the dove makes sense. So then to go after the ring, the circle is a symbol of fully integrated self. As a merchant, right, the agent of the profane to like sell out, basically, makes sense. Yeah. So in all of these, it's like a good fight. It's like, oh, a dove, I'm going to be a hawk. Oh, a ring, I'm going to be a merchant and try to get your visionary inner feminine to sell you out. And she actually doesn't. She's perfectly loyal. And the ring, is the one who loses faith, which is kind of its own form of like mini failure, betrayal. Gary, if you can hear me, we lost your connection. At least I did. So yeah, text me or let me know if you need me to reinvite you. But then the last transformation, or the second to last transformation, where the wizard changes into a hen, right? That, again, just like the jacket inside out, that makes no sense at all, right? Because it changes into a feminine symbol, which is perfectly vulnerable. A hen has no defenses, especially against the polecat, right? And if we go back a bit, the ring changes into the barley grain because he doesn't fully trust the inner feminine. If he trusted, he would just stay the ring and then he would eventually be another thing, right? So at that moment, the boy has messed up. He actually lost faith and turned into a barley grain.
Yeah.
And at that point, the merchant does not need to change into a hen. The merchant is still a human. The boy is turned into a barley grain. If I'm the merchant, all I have to do is like step on it and crush the barley grain. Done.
Yeah.
But yeah. What does the wizard do? The wizard does another shape-shifting and turns into a hen, literally a sitting duck.
Yeah.
Right? It does not seem accidental to me. And he therefore allows the tricky boy, the version 2.0, the emerging inner masculine, to turn into a polecat and finish the transformation. So in this case, turning into a hen is pretty much like looking the other way while the boy changes his jacket and saying, oh, you're a different boy. Can you read? Oh, no, you can't read? Wink, wink. Okay, yeah, come on in. Come on in.
Right.
Said another way, this wizard, seeming Pratyeka Buddha,
right,
understands the transformation that's coming, and is secretly in collusion with the transformation. Right. And, which is exactly what a real life Pratyeka Buddha does as well.
Right.
The Pratyeka Buddha's teaching is to not teach. And if you choose to read that book, you sit with why a Buddha would not teach, and it's not shamey, and it's not laziness, and it's not selfishness, but the Projected Buddha is still a Buddha, and their method of emanating is to not teach. When you realize why that is, you will get the thing you're looking for, right? And that's one of, an infinite amount of paths, in this world. And the Projected Buddha just does it in the Projected Buddha way. That's how they roll. So what's fascinating is that in the end of the story, they advance to this next level of inner masculine, inner feminine. Right in the beginning, there's the wizard, inner masculine. There's no inner feminine. And in the end, there's an inner feminine, the princess, the inner masculine, the boy. They marry. So transformation complete, inner masculine, inner feminine, integration complete, happily ever after. They can go off and, be fertile and abundant and multiply. Now, again, this is within you, the inner masculine and feminine within you. So we're not talking about biological children necessarily, but your creativity, your productivity, your generativity starts to flow again, right? After you go through this inner transformation. And then what happens? Then this 2.0 inner masculine, who now is the only one who still has the power of shape shifting because the wizard is dead, leaves off magic.
Yeah.
He retires too.
Yeah.
In other words, he also does not teach.
Yeah.
So what is going on here? Right?
Yeah.
And this, to me, this was a zinger to me personally from the Muse. Right?
Yeah.
Because it's basically saying you have completed the transformation. And what was supposed to be transformed was not that you teach shapeshifting. The reason we leaked out the wisdom and knowledge of shapeshifting is to get the wizard himself transformed into the boy. And now that we've done that, it's still okay to not teach shapeshifting and not do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the boy could continue selling himself as a horse, which is like this, kind of motif of selling your own body, right? We do it all the time. I don't mean just like in illegal ways of selling your body, but in like working so hard, you give away your health in exchange for money and prestige, right? We sell our bodies all the time. So the boy could continue doing that, and he doesn't do that anymore. Right? He has all these superpowers. He could become king, and he doesn't. So there is this feeling of transformation, but in a boundaried way. Okay. So the wizard has undergone this transformation into the boy. So 2.0, next gen, all of that succeeded. But the fact that he does not teach has survived the transformation. And that in the story is seen as a good thing. Right? The story could have been silent, could have been tacit on the question of whether the boy taught or not.
Yeah.
But it explicitly said he was basically a Projected Buddha as well.
Yeah.
And that is very significant to me because it's like you can use the power you have to transform. And when you transform, you can also still have boundaries.
Right.
Right. So you can you're this Projected Buddha, you can transform, and at the end of the transformation, if it's been properly boundaried, you can still be a Projected Buddha, but the other aspects of transformation still have. The flow can still flow.
Right.
Right. So one thing to say here is that one point of the story for me is not that this is a moralistic lesson, oh, you better teach or else someone's going to steal it and you'll die. The point is that whether you share knowledge or not,
Mhm.
you still have to go through your transformation. Right? That's the cycle of life. The cycle of life is not teaching and arguing over how you teach what you know. The cycle of life is continued transformation. Right? And so the point of stealing the knowledge by the boy was not to give it away for free and post it on WikiLeaks and the internet or whatever. The point was to use it for transformation between him and the wizard. Right? So, uh, so the tension then on the point of Pratyeka
Yeah.
is not to release knowledge because others need it. That's not the blockage.
Right.
Right? Because then then it is itself this ego thing. It's like, oh, great Pratyeka Buddha, if you don't teach, we're all so lost. You're the great guru. That's absolute nonsense. Right? The keys to enlightenment are everywhere. Even as Jesus said at the end of the Thomas Gospel, right? The kingdom of heaven is spread upon the earth and people do not see it. Right? So the issue is not that, oh, you're hoarding this thing that the world, the poor Slavs that have not enlightened don't have it. That's not the point. The point is that if you don't teach or you don't release the knowledge, something's not flowing through you that will block your own transformation.
Yeah.
Right. And so, so you teach it in your own way, and transformation will end up flowing through anyway. Right? Books and knowledge, said another way, are not a symbol of knowledge in dreams. Books and knowledge are a symbol of your own deep inner power.
Right.
Okay. And here's where we shift into this topic of recovering your inner power as this story has guided us into it. Because so when I teach about inner masculine, and regardless of your gender, right, we all have an inner masculine within us. And I've said this countless sessions before. I won't go into it again. But there's often a tension, especially when I work with men, around fear of power, their own personal power. Right? Often men have self-suppressed their own inner masculine power. Willingly, they've chosen to do this because when they were children, as a young boy, you saw older men, uncles, fathers, grandfathers, behaving very poorly. Right? You witnessed a lot of toxic, bad behavior, treating women badly, and basically the young boy is like, okay, if that's what I have to become, I'm not going to do that. I will self-suppress if I have to in order to protect the feminine, not just my mom and sisters, but to protect the feminine within me. Right? Because my inner masculine, regardless of the culture, still realizes it's my function, my innate DNA function to protect everyone within me, especially the inner feminine. And so in the culture I've ended up landing in, if masculine is toxic, one way I can protect everyone is to suppress myself. Right? So men like this have very weak inner masculines. They have lousy boundaries. They're horrible at setting boundaries because that's a masculine function. But they're horrible at manifesting because that's a masculine function. But they're very nurturing, feminine, and they're visionary. Right? So guys who suppress their masculine have strong feminine. They have incredible vision, but they can't implement themselves out of a paper bag. Right? It's all castles in the sky, and they're dreamers, and nothing ever gets done. I'm just, painting a caricature of the extremes here. Women, and of course, this applies to the full range of genders, but just to keep it simple. On the other end of the spectrum, women also have inner masculine, right, and feminine, as all humans do. But women can also suppress their own inner masculine for a whole other set of reasons that actually we end up talking when we do the relationship program and when we do live retreat. We talk about all of this dynamics. There's a whole 2x2 matrix of like men and women, and men who have inner masculine or feminine suppressed, women who have inner masculine and feminine suppressed. what each profile looks like, and then what happens when one profile dates the other or marries the other. Some it's very stable, and in other combinations, it's like World War III. Okay, so we won't get into all that here. But when a woman will have a suppressed inner masculine, for all sorts of reasons, they will end up with a man who also suppresses his own inner masculine. So they both look at him, the outer reflection of both their inner masculines, and they both suppress him. He suppresses himself, she suppresses him too. And the thing you always hear, that I have always heard from women in these situations, they say, well, I know he's not spicy, but at least he will never hurt me. Okay. And then even when they fight, she absolutely incinerates him. The volcano blows and he's like a little ash at the end of it. And he doesn't fight back. And her reaction to him not fighting back is not even, oh, good. Her reaction is she rolls her eyes. She's like, why is he so weak? Okay. So anyway, there's a whole lot to say about suppression of inner masculine and feminine in men and women. But the point is that as anyone, right, who is trying to recover your power, if you did suppress your power, it's because of the fear that I will do something bad with it. Right? If I'm a man and I exercise and flex my power in the world, I will become like the toxic examples I saw growing up. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to suppress all my power. And you end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You have no power left to do anything. These books in the story are a case in point. Okay. Why do you want the books? Why are the books, the power of the books, why is the power of the books going to be released to you or not in this? It's not enough to curse and swear that I will not do, if you give me the books, I will not do this bad thing and I will not do that bad thing. That's not enough. Right? Manifestation wise, it's like, if I give you the gun and you promise not to do this bad thing and not to do that bad thing, and that's your big plan, then congratulations, I won't give you the gun. You're not going to do anything with it anyway. Why do you need the gun? Yeah. Right? So swearing I'm not going to do anything bad with power, with money, with anger, with power manifestation. Swearing I'm not going to do anything bad simply means you will not get that power because you're not going to do anything with it anyway. Yeah. And so you remain powerless. And your own power remains suppressed. So if you want to actually recover your inner power, you have to say to yourself, not just what you promise you won't do with the power. You have to also say, what are you planning to do with the power? And what are you planning to do with the power? Right? That begs the question of, well, what then is the proper use of power?
Right.
Okay, and you can do the simple cliche thing where it's like, well, I'm going to use the gun not to rob a bank, but I'm going to use the gun to defend my homeland. Right, so that's a proper use of power. So that's, level 1 of inner masculine, boundaries, keeping people out. That's level 1. So that's good. That's fine. But with this story, it starts to touch the jugular of an even deeper, level 5, level 10 of the proper use of power. Okay. Which is what actually happens in the story. And I'll just lay it out. The recovery of inner masculine, the proper use of power at its highest levels, is not obviously for conquest or toxicity or domination or abuse, but it's also not just for defense and keeping boundaries. The even deeper, almost secret right and proper use of power is transformation. Yeah. Transformation. Right? If all I'm doing as the warrior inner masculine is keeping out, sort of toxic agents and keeping you safe, that's fine. But that's not enough to transform. When the warrior in you rises to the level of king, the king also keeps boundaries, but not to keep things out, but also to contain and keep things in. Right? At the king level is where you have, the iron walls of the witch's cauldron. right? The king has the power to be the container for that fire and cooking pot, where you keep the flames of the fire out and you keep the bubbling stuff that the witch is cooking in without melting into goo, right? So that kingly power of containment is what allows for transformation. So like boy, man, king, sage, right? Transformation happens at the king level. So the wizard in the story is in secret collusion with the boy, who then uses the power of books to do this. Right? The transformation happens because the wizard dies and the boy continues, but the shape shifting along the way is literally the transformation, transforming, shape shifting, shift shaping, transforming, right? Form, shape, trans, shift. The wizard / boy, the inner masculine in composite, uses the power of shape shifting, transforming, to complete the meta transformation to find the inner feminine. And once he's done with it, he puts the power aside, the magic aside, until he perhaps will need it for the next transformation.
Yeah.
Right? Like every king, when the war is over, he puts his sword away. He doesn't wave it around, showing it off, right? To impress, the ladies of the court. Not that that's inappropriate. That's what the warrior does. And a little bit, and that's what boys play at. But the king, sort of draws the sword of power when needed, does the transformation when that's done, and that's when the transformation is complete, because the boy leaves off magic at the end as well.
Right.
So,
I mean, that's as you were saying this. One of the things that came, especially the part about shape-shifting and transforming, I just thought that there's so much trickster energy in this story. I mean, the whole act of shape-shifting, turning the jacket inside out to fool the wizard, and then fooling people again with, changing into a horse and back again. That aspect is just so reminiscent of the Trickster stories that we did before, and I'll share the links for those as well. And I remember something you said when we were doing the Trickster series is, sometimes the whole point of a trickster's trickeries is to kind of initiate or trigger transformation. Right? And a trickster does this, and his starting point is always appetite. Right?
Yes.
To fulfill this insatiable kind of appetite. And we see that in the story where, he already can read. He takes delight in reading, and he's read a lot, but now he's going out into the world to find more books to read. And he finds this wizard who has like a whole library of dusty old books. He says, that's perfect for me because I want to read. And he reads and reads and reads. So there's this appetite at the beginning. And there's also all of this shape-shifting that happens. Even the jacket turning inside out is a kind of shape-shifting, as you pointed out. Right. And then the actual magical shape-shifting cycle. All of it, and the final death of the wizard, where the hen and the polecat, also is one of trickery, right? Almost like he turns into this helpless seed of grain, and instantly then he becomes a polecat and snares the hen. There's so much trickery involved in how he kills the wizard. So I was just feeling that we did this entire series on the trickster archetype, and here it is. Like sometimes the entire dance that you go through and everything, all the circumambulation and all the labyrinthine movement, if you want to put it down to what is the point of all this, it comes down to the point of all this as transformation. That all of it Yeah.
But you would say the boy is the trickster.
The wizard is a trickster himself. It's just the older trickster and the younger trickster.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I see the wizard as like the meta trickster on all of this, because it's like, I mean, by the end of the story, when you look back, it's like, okay, so the wizard is all that. He can do everything. Even as the horse, he knows like to nail the mouth shut, right? Which I read as like, so that the horse boy cannot speak the spell that will change him back, right?
Yeah.
So it's like stopping the embodied form of the horse from speaking, taking the power of voice away. And so you realize how powerful the wizard is.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes the beginning premise of the story absolutely comical, where it's like, so the wizard can't cast a spell to like change the dust on all the books into like fairy gold. He needs to go out and find like some random peasant boy to come help dust his books. Really? Right. So it's interesting because when you read it straightly and allegorically, there's so much fear, threat, and control in the wizard and the boy fighting it out, good versus evil, old versus new, and what's right and what's wrong. And then when you start to read it mythopoetically, where it's like the wizard is me, and the boy is me, and the princess is me, and the ring is me, and the books are me, and the dust is me.
Right.
You start to realize that's like, so the wizard part of me didn't need to initiate any of this, but it did anyway.
Yeah.
And why is that? Right? Why is that? And the whole thing becomes, when you read something mythopoetically, you remove the overlay of fear, threat, and control.
Right.
And you just look at the overall symbol of the dream, of the story itself. And it becomes this like incredible, story of self-love. This wizard part of you starts this entire set of affairs in motion on like the thinnest of alibis. Right. Oh, I need someone to dust my books. That's because I somehow can do all these things, but I can't dust my books myself. Right. Yeah, that's the ticket. Let's do that. And starts this whole thing where at the end of it, he dies.
Right.
Right. And inner masculine and inner feminine are together again in full youth, fertility, virility, generativity, and the flow of life continues. And that's just, to me, that whole feeling of like this part of you initiating this, that seems terrifying to you from the profane lens, but seen from the sacred lens is like this incredibly, in many ways, very sexy expression and action of self-love, self-care, self-esteem, nourishing regard,
Yeah.
And you start to think about in our own lives, when has it been in our own lives that we have, loved ourselves in this way? That from the outside, it's like just this train wreck of things that we've done, but we have meandered and circumambulated through. And at the end, we end up in this place where it's just like, I can't believe, like if I told myself the story of how I got here, I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't lived through it. And it's just you're filled with gratitude, but the even bigger feeling is like wonder. It's like I am grateful, but I don't even know how all of that happened. What even, WTF? What even happened to let me end up in this place now? And it's this beautiful feeling of awe, wonder, aesthetic arrest that ends up happening when you see all this through this mythopoetic sacred lens.
Yeah. So like I said, it's just the fact that this entire thing is a dance around transformation, and like both the dancers know it, and they do it because it's almost like a ritual now, right? Just like how
That's right.
jacket inside out turning at the beginning was a kind of a ritual. It's almost like they're speaking code, and to see if they complete the code, and then you're the right person. So let's move ahead. Like you have to say the passcode before I let you in. and you have half the key and I have half the key. So if we both say that, then okay, then we proceed. And then they do this entire dance, and at the end, I'm reminded of the story that we did last month, right? Where he goes through the prince, right, who marries the frog princess. He goes through all these rituals. The princess tells him, whatever task your father gives you, you just have to eat for 7 days and sleep for 7 days and do everything like you do normally. And on the seventh day, I'll get you what you need to go and present to your father, right?
Yeah.
And he does that, and he just almost blindly follows what his wife says. And he wins the reward. And that we connected to how, if you want to find your inner purpose, you kind of find the muse's vision, right? And you just follow it. And now, listening to what you said about transformation, I'm thinking you transform, and every step there is a newer version of you and a newer version of you. And it seems like all these transformations are kind of a conduit, right, for the muse's vision. Because ultimately, when you integrate with the feminine, that's what you're going to do. You're going to just follow the vision and follow the feminine and integrate and fully bring in, and generate the next steps in your path. And that again leads to further transformation. So it's a continuous cycle that keeps going. But as you keep integrating and keep moving ahead, it feels like this entire series of transformations itself is a conduit, is like a beautiful pretext for the muse to manifest the vision and keep moving.
Yeah, and I would say, going one step further, even that we've spoken before about the 3 levels of will, need, want, and desire.
Right.
And we typically associate desire with bliss, the things you do for no good reason.
Right.
When I have observed the muse and the lives of others in my own life, if I'm being honest, it is across the entire spectrum of not just desire, but also want and need that the muse uses as her paintbrushes.
Yes.
Right. Like if you don't listen enough, she can hit the need and make you do something because you need the money, right? To get you to shut up and do it anyway. Or things you will do and you're like, that's not muse, that's just money and prestige. But I guess I'll let myself do money and prestige anyway. The muse will be behind that. In hindsight, you'll be like, oh my gosh, she was there kind of, making lemonade with lemons, right? Just still a guiding hand, making everything work out in the end. And so, so I mean, part of this is, from one perspective, you could say, well, I need to unsuppress my power. I need to get going. I need to allow myself to transform. And thanks, Artie and Gary, this story really helps me do that. But you could take another view, equally valid, which is, oh, so given all this, I just kind of live my life, resist however I feel moved to resist, and it'll all somehow work out anyway. I don't know that either of those is wrong. If you asked me to pick, I think I would have to flip a coin, right? So yeah, it's very, for me, it's very beautiful and comforting from that perspective.
Yes, I mean it's very valid, particularly because in the sacred space we talk about sacred being devoid of fear, threat, and control, and you could even think of your entire life as sacred itself, in a way, containing the dichotomy of sacred and profane within it, but as a whole, as a shell, your life is sacred. So then, whatever the motivations are, whether it's money and prestige and all of the profane motivations, or sacred, it ultimately then serves the sacred, because it is, in a way, like you said, and I've experienced this, where the muse tells you to do something, and when you've engaged with her enough to start to recognize her voice, right? And it's coming from her. It's the muse telling you, but at first you start to doubt, am I thinking about this because of the money? Oh, the money is good and I think I should do it, but is it because of the money, or is it also because of desire and because the muse is telling me? And then you start to realize it's actually both. And that it's okay. Because that's how the muse gets you to that point where she wants you, right? And going through the money is not a bad thing at all. It's all right? So it's a fantastic thing that you say, because then you realize the sacredness of things, and you don't even have to worry about, oh, is this profane or is this sacred? And it's kind of okay either way.
Yeah, just referencing. So I just want to build on something you said, just to share a little bit in a different kind of direction also. Which is when you said everything is actually sacred. So there's sacred and profane, and then the meta wrapper is sacred. And so that's a profound point. I completely agree with that. And then just to kind of skirt a little bit on the spiritual side, just for the sake of completeness, when we did the Tao Te Ching, this relates to the Joycean aesthetic arrest talk as well. And maybe we can put those links here as well.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, the reason... So the answer is that all of reality is intrinsically sacred.
Right.
And I don't want to say profane is an illusion. I don't want to sort of get into those, sort of splitting hairs. But the reason all of reality is sacred is not particularly spiritual. It's just simple logic and common sense, which is what we covered in the Tao Te Ching talk, is that the nature of reality is that there is only one thing that actually exists. There is no second thing. So in order to have fear, threat, and control, it's just logic, you need two things.
Right.
You need a subject and you need an object. If there's only one thing that exists, that never stops existing, there is no fear, threat, and control.
Right.
Because there is no second thing to either be threatened or controlled, and there is no second thing to threaten or control.
Right.
So through the lens of sacred and profane, the intrinsic nature of reality is sacred.
Yeah.
And when you bring yourself into a sacred place, in the thing we're writing now, the deep calming manuscript, right? We talk about the hurricane and the center of the wheel, and the center of the hurricane is like the sacred place where the winds are not turning. It doesn't mean you suppress the winds or the winds don't exist. It's like they are turning, but there is always a spot in the center of the wheel. There is always a spot in the maelstrom of your life.
Yeah.
And in the world, with wars going on and, political sort of firestorms happening.
Yeah.
There is always a center of the storm, which only if you want, you don't have to. You can rest it and stay there for as long as you want. It's not privilege or not, it's just a physical thing. You can, within the center of yourself, there is always that eye within the storm.
Yeah.
And it's just a thing, it's just always there. And that is the umbilical cord to the intrinsic sacred nature of all reality, of you. I mean, name all the things or name none of them. It doesn't matter, because the thing we're talking about is the only actual thing that actually exists.
Yeah.
So it is like that umami flavor
Mm-hmm.
that you taste in all these different traditions. Once you taste it, you don't need any religion. You can kind of just walk around, chewing it like a piece of gum all day and like taking nourishment from it.
Yeah.
And you can get a little umami hit anywhere. Yeah, so I just wanted to elaborate when you said sacred and profane, but it's all sacred. That's what we mean by that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Artie. That's
Long-winded nutshell.
no, there's so many metaphors in there, so you can't miss it.
We'll see.
So what other thing that I wanted to come to in this is, to me, when you first explain, the whole transformation, as well as in this particular story, how, the wizard tries to prevent the transformation, at least seemingly, by hoarding knowledge, not letting, the personal power come through, because that's where we finally got the insight that this is talking about recovering your personal power. It was really powerful for me, because to know that when we suppress our personal power, and there's a whole lot of dynamics that we go through in life, there are various ways in which we suppress our own power. And we try to find it and recover it in various ways. So it takes a lot of different varieties of forms. But there's also sometimes guilt associated with not recovering our power, because, I'm not fulfilling my potential. I'm not really doing the right thing by suppressing my power, and I should be more powerful, and I should allow my power to come through. But this insight is really nourishing, because when you have this insight, the reason you release or recover your personal power is because otherwise you're stuck. And what we need that power is for transformation. And when you allow that power to come through, the one thing that will happen is that you transform. And that's what you really are afraid. And at the root of everything, the reason you kind of suppress it is because you're afraid of transformation, which is natural. There's really nothing wrong with that, right?
Right. And I would just adjust it or add one point that it's not that it's a transformation you must affect, fear, threat, and control. It's a transformation that is coming whether you're ready or not.
Yeah.
And that is what is drawing on the power that is hidden in the attic.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
It's really powerful to have this all condensed into this one little piece of insight, right? Because then you know that every time you feel that slight fear that you feel when you're going through a transformation, and also when you're trying to kind of suppress something within you, it's all part of this. But that to know that transformation is coming anyway, it's very comforting. At this point, from where I sit, I feel very comforted by that thought.
I often feel terrified myself, but yeah. You do you.
I've lost count how many times I've said in sacred space that I'm absolutely terrified by transformation.
Yeah. It's terrifying.
I have a little piece of comfort once in a while.
And that's why, that's one of the things I love about having these conversations in sacred space, is because we're kind of speaking in the abstract. We're kind of laying out the pattern, hoping people pick it up and like use it as a lens to look at their own stuff.
Yeah.
Because I mean, when you're in a one-on-one session with someone, like in an advisee situation or even in a friend situation, it's very hard to like, put that in someone's face, right? Because then you get entangled and drawn into the entire drama of the hurricane as well. And for me, that's why I don't do a lot of that work. I just kind of don't. That's not particularly blissful for me. But yeah, so the way we teach is more of it's not a, this is good for you, you better do this. It's like, yeah, let's talk about fairy tales and, oh, that's an interesting dream you had and what's going on with this or what's going on with that. And after a while, you start to see on your own steam the pattern overall. And as many advisees have said to me over years, the image they would use is that, I realized I was going around trying to put out all these fires. And then after a while, I realized there's an underlying source of all the fires. And I'm like, I just like turn off the gas valve and I don't even fight the fires. They all just burn out on their own. And you're like, oh, okay. And it's like, and people are like, well, why don't you just do that? It's like, well, even at a global macro level, to say like, certain wars happening in the world, certain political conflicts and polarizations happening in the world can be, as a metaphor, seen as fires, and there's a deeper sort of gas leak to turn off. It's like, you can't say that to people. They like lose their minds, right? And that's what there's all kinds of reasons why that is. And we just roll with it. We don't say that to people.
Right.
But we try to lay it out a little bit more obliquely and let people pick up. We try not to be allegorical. We try to be metaphorical, mythopoetic, and symbolic. And then the people who pick up on it end up running, like very quietly, just running with it right away. And it's just, it's just heaven, bliss for me to be a fly on the wall to witness that when that happens. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. I mean, that's a lot of why, things like retreats and online, when we're in small group or whatever, that's kind of the magic of it for me. That's the blissful part for me.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Artie. Do you have an exercise to reflect on personal power?
Yes. Okay. So here's the exercise. And so when we suggest the exercise, again, fourth principle of proceeding sacred space, no expectation of participation. It's just a suggestion. Do it only if you want. Don't do it at all. You don't even need to hear it. You can like close your browser now and stop the session. It's whatever you want to do, only if you want. But the way to do this exercise, it's just a prompt for reflection. Just sit quietly in a room for 5-10 minutes or in your car or wherever with some pen and paper. And just free associate, brain dump, write out your answers and thoughts and reflections to the following question. Which is, what do you fear about your own power? Okay. For example, if you were the kind of person that's like, no one in my family listens to me, no one in my workplace listens to me, I'm like a voice in the wilderness, and if only they listened to me, everything would be fine. Okay, cool. What if, and this is another sort of thing to write your answers to, take your family. What if everyone in your family, and wave a magic wand, actually listened to you and did what you told them to do? What is actually the scariest thing about that? Right now, I can think of a dozen things that would be terrifying about that for anyone. But what is the scariest thing about that for you? If everyone in your family actually listened to you, took your advice, as commandments and did what you said. What is the scariest thing about that for you? Another example, it could be around ego power and money. So let's say you had instantly wave a magic wand. You had $30 million in the bank right now. So a very stunning, large reflection of one reflection of your own personal power. What, if anything, would be scary about that? Right? For instance, would you be like, oh my gosh, like people would be knocking on my door day and night, wanting to ask me to like borrow money or want money for these projects, these charities. Family members would appear out of the woodwork. I have no boundaries, so I don't like that. That would be terrifying. Or if people knew I had that much money, like people would only love me, people will only date me, people will only be friends with me only for my money. Right? Or I might use the money to buy things that will make people envy me, and then I will lose friends because they can't keep up with my vacations and purchases and everything, which often happens in real life. Or I may end up promising not to do this, but I may end up spending a bunch of this money to purchase things that I will ultimately use to hurt myself. Okay. So that's the first part of the exercise. Imagine these huge inflows of power, everyone listening to you in the workplace and family, everyone, having just huge, raw financial power. What would be terrifying about those things? So that's part one. And then part two is, now after you've done that, you may find that, okay, there's a million reasons to fear your personal power. Fine. Right? If we're really honest, there's a million reasons to not want the $30 million. Maybe there are a million reasons to want it too. That's fine. I'm just saying it's not all upside. There's potential downside as well. And so the counter question is, if the first question is what is scary about it, the second question is, what is the transformational purpose of power, of those scenarios of power? So, for instance, in that same scenario, if everyone in your family would listen to you and do what you say, there's all kinds of reasons that would be terrifying. But on the other side, if everyone in your family would listen to you and do what you said, and we'll keep this very simple and laser focused, if you could only change one thing in your family overall, said another way, if there were a transformation you could affect in your family, but only one, what would it be? They'll all listen to you. They'll all do what you say, but for only one thing. There's only one thing you could change, but you can change it. It's a silver bullet. You fire it, it will work, but you only get one. What would it be? In the money example, if you had all that money in the bank, $30 million, okay, all kinds of reasons you could fear it and over. So put all that aside. On the other side, the scenario is you have the 30 million in the bank, but you can only do one thing with it, and you have to do it tomorrow at 8 a.m. because you're going to lose it anyway. What is the one transformation you would affect with that money? And no, transferring it to gold bars so you keep the money doesn't count. Nice try, though. Nice try. Right. You have to use it, put that ego power, all of it to work in one shot. Silver bullet, whatever you put it against it, the thing will move, right? But you can only do one thing, one transformation you would affect. Only one, and you need to decide and implement by tomorrow. What would it be? Okay. And so what you may find with an exercise like this is that you compare the answers. Typically what will happen is when you land on the correct answer that makes your body zing, right? We're like, oh my gosh, that is what I would do. If there was, I mean, all the complaints about my family, if there was only one thing, it actually would just be this one thing. I mean, I practically give my life, my left arm, for this one thing to happen in my family. Right? Everything else is cleanup. We could deal with it. But if this one thing happened, we would be there. And similarly with the money, if this one transformation I could affect, everything else is just cleanup afterwards, just tying up loose ends. But this is the one thing, right? Then you will have your answer to what you would use with power. And in the face of that, I mean, this isn't a retreat, or we're not going to do this live, but hypothetically, what would happen if you walk through it in stepwise manner is once you land on the right answer, all your fears would fall away. And you would recover your own inner power. It's not like you go digging for it and it's like, oh, I found it. Now what do I do with it? Right? It's like your inner board of directors, for those of you who have done healing with me, they have already voted. They have the power to call back power anytime. All of your suppressed power can come back to you in an instant. But it's a hung jury. It's 5 versus 5, and like nothing moves. When they all agree and the vote is 10-0, this is the thing we do with power. This is the meaning and purpose of our life. You don't have to look for power. You say, this is the thing. It's 10-0 vote. The power comes back on its own. The army is always there. It knows what to do. It's just waiting for an order. Right? You're like, well, it's like, yeah, I know you're like the weaker one in the family. It's like, do you not have a voice? Are you physically not able to like pound your fist on the table? Right? It's like, of course you can. You don't, because you suppress it. And there's all kinds of reasons you suppress it. But when you align to the point where you're like, this is the silver bullet. If I had only one silver bullet and I had to fire it tomorrow, this is what I would fire it on. Then like all the things you promise you won't use power, all the naughty things all fall away. It's like, yeah, whether I do those things or not is none of your business. This is the one thing I am decreed, right, through my body, through my being, through my bliss, all of it, to effect with whatever power I have. 30 million, 30 billion, it doesn't matter. This is the thing. Once you hit on that and touch the jugular of it, power flows through you automatically, because this is like the meaning and purpose of your life. All the obstacles fall away. And I mean, sometimes the exercise itself is terrifying because you realize the one thing you're supposed to be doing, that you want to do, that is your bliss to do, will often be the one thing you were told in childhood you were not allowed to do, or else you would lose love, right? Long story short. So yeah, it's simple when I lay it out like that at the end of a live sacred space session, but I'm not saying it's easy, right? I mean, that's why there's all this support we give to do this kind of work. It's just like scoring a goal in the World Cup. It's like, it's simple, just kick the ball into the net, but it doesn't mean it's easy. There are complications, there's all these fears, there's another team opposing us for now. But if we get to the point where all 22 players on the team are trying to put the ball in one of the goals, it will happen, right? It doesn't matter how hard it seemed before. Once you're aligned, it happens thoughtlessly, automatically. Okay. So anyway, that's the exercise. Do it only if you want. And if you have thoughts on it, send me email. I'd love to hear people's experiences with it. Okay, so that's all we had for the session. And now I'll go ahead and close the session. The next session is next month. It's free. It's open to the public. Please feel free to invite others. Let me put the link down. One thing we might start doing again is doing Q&A in these sessions. Let me know if you all are interested. And the way to do that is I would just invite everyone watching this session, especially if you've watched to the end. So you get extra bonus points. go ahead and go into the link for the next session. And if you have questions for me on anything, on a program you're doing, question about life in general, world events, questions about the exercises I've shared here, past exercises, go ahead and post those. There's a way to post questions, not in the chat, please, but there's a special question section. You can post questions as soon as you can. So before next month's session, Gary and I will go in, look at what questions have been posted. And if there's some good, interesting questions there, we may just do a Q&A session of the next Sacred Space. So again, only if you want, but that's something we'll just offer to the intrepid souls that have been listening all the way to this point in the Sacred Space session. Okay, so with that, I'll go ahead and close this session for us now and send you on your way. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and with us, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week and month, and I will see you all in the next session. Happy Sunday, everyone. Thank you.